Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. Today I'm speaking with Michael Little. Welcome, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. We just mentioned a bit before the call, it's evening time in Melbourne here, so we're a little sleepy, but we'll power through it. So for the listeners out there, could you give a small summary as to the projects you're involved in at the moment? And once we've covered that, we'll reverse and go back to where it all began.
Yeah, okay. So the main thing that I'm working on at the moment is a project called VoltPay, which is essentially point of sale for Lightning. What I'm trying to achieve with that is keeping things simple to make it easy for non-Bitcoiners that are running a business to get involved and accept Bitcoin. And that sort of thing.
Okay. We'll dissect the business and the problem you're solving later down the line, Michael. But what we're going to do is rewind slightly and find out a bit more about yourself. So you haven't always been into Bitcoin, I imagine. You're a technical founder at this point, are you? Do you have a background in development, perhaps? Talk to me a little bit about early days and what your passions were as a teenager and what that led you through to.
Yeah, for sure. I've always been a bit of a nerd, I guess. So yeah, technical side comes pretty naturally. And I've always worked in sort of small businesses, startups, and that sort of thing. So although I haven't always been, running the show, I've been involved in a lot of the technical side of startups. Probably things got crazy for me as with a lot of people back in 2008, 2009. I started working for, I don't know if I should name drop or that sort of thing, but a pretty large company in the real estate industry. Mm-hmm. At that time, sort of with everything going crazy in the world, I was one of the people that was made redundant, so I sort of lost my job there. But from that, an opportunity came up, and we started building a CRM for real estate agents. So over the last 10 years or more now, that's really what I've been focusing on, and that's always been sort of very small scale, and very, very startup focused. So we never really grew big out of that.
And just to jump in, Michael, so when you're working in real estate, you're working as a developer for a real estate business. There's no need to mention the company name specifically, but like, what was your day-to-day job in that world?
Essentially I was a developer. So all of the software side, the programs were effectively the back end for real estate agents. So they run all of their business based on that, and then it uploads all property listings to the portals and that sort of thing. So yeah, I build the full stack that's backing that, from all of the database side, front end, back end, wow, everything.
Because I don't know if this is relevant per se, but if I go online and I'm searching for a property here in Australia, the famous websites are Domain and realestate.com. Back in the UK, Rightmove, Zoopla, absolutely huge, unicorn valuation businesses. So for sure, I guess post the dot-com crash of the late 90s, some of these companies were founded and they were basically modern versions of online marketplaces that did extremely well. Were you guys connected to that space in a sense, and just to understand the product a bit more? So I, as the punter looking to buy real estate, were you involved in that kind of residential side of things, or was it more of a commercial thing?
So we're sort of the piece that's in the middle of all of those portals and the agents. So we sit between them and connect everything together.
And that's the CRM that you're currently developing, or that was the previous role that you had in 2008?
Both, actually. Okay, so cool. Yeah, right, it was a larger company, and then we left and spun up a new version, essentially, doing things with a different approach. So yeah.
And so to rewind even further back before 2008. So can you remember what it was that first interested you about technology? So you use the phrase, a bit of a nerd. It's important to recognize one's strengths, right? And to understand how you might fit into the world. And every team has a different type of character. So talk to me a bit about what that means to you and how becoming a developer was the route that you ended up taking.
I guess it all started going way back. I didn't really do well at school and that sort of thing. I left school year 11, just wasn't happy there and that sort of thing. Went and found a job. It was I knew that I wanted to be something in IT, but wasn't really sure what exactly. So I went and got this job doing sales support at an IT company. So essentially, I was running around doing whatever the salespeople needed me to do in this company that was selling hardware, and that wasn't really my jam. And I kind of just worked my way into doing bits and pieces. So I put together some internal programs that they needed for reporting and stuff like that. I put together little website things, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I would just start tinkering around and solved some problems that they had in the business. And I guess from there it just took me into the software side of things. Basically, I managed to solve some problems and I enjoyed doing it, so it led me down that path.
And that's what happens for everyone, right? we come across these situations in our lives, and suddenly the door opens, and you either go through or you don't. And you can always look back and think, oh, was that the right decision to make, or whatever the case might be. So did you have any formal training in software development, or is this something that you've taught yourself essentially?
I taught myself. I did later, do the university thing and that sort of stuff. I moved into I changed jobs and I was in the city, so I was spending 2 hours on the train each way, sort of thing, every day. So I just went, I've got to do something while I'm sitting on the train. So I got myself a post-grad degree, and I never
just
really
on from your commute.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, I never really found much benefit in it, but it was kind of something to pass the time while I was because it was that or sleep.
Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah.
And sometimes, as silly as it sounds, getting the piece of paper that says you can do something is actually, frustratingly useful. And it does open doors that perhaps wouldn't be open otherwise. What's cool though is that obviously you did something that you were passionate about. Too many people end up in third tier tertiary education, and they're doing, I mean, I myself included in a sense, went to university because it was fun, not necessarily because of the education I was getting, which is crazy in hindsight. But saying that, the business degree I did definitely opened some doors that wouldn't have previously been there, because employers had like blanket rules where they're like, if you haven't got a degree, we're not going to interview you. So it does go both ways, doesn't it? Okay. And so you're obviously picking up all of these skills, like your expertise is becoming better and better. Can you talk to me about Bitcoin and when that became part of your psyche? And everyone has like a moment where they first came across it, or they were like, actually, they had a friend who's like, mate, you need to look at this. Talk to me a bit about that period.
I've always had an interest in money, and that sounds pretty bad, but I don't know, the numbers and that sort of thing, accumulating money. It's just been something that's interested in me. And at the same time, I've always been, I'm a pretty skeptical person in general. I'm the last person to jump on a bandwagon and that sort of thing. I'd never had a Facebook account until 10 years after everyone else, and I tend to avoid the trends. So I always stayed away from shares and stock markets. I thought it was all a big scam. I thought it was all rigged, which now I think that even more. And I think I heard about Bitcoin first from a friend in like 2013 or something. That's a scam. Just ignored it. Didn't really think about it much.
Scam.
Yep. Probably, I think it popped up again late 2016. There was like a news article, Bitcoin's crashed, it's never coming back. And for some reason at that point, it piqued my interest. So I started looking into it a little bit, and it took me a little while. But then I went and actually got some. And then obviously, what happened 2017, 18, things go crazy. And there was all of the other stuff, all the shitcoins around and everything. Even like I was quite skeptical of everything. And I did my best to, right from the very beginning, it was like, yeah, I kind of trust Bitcoin, and everything else is a bit dodgy. I don't really trust it, but I still dabbled a bit, as you do. And I just, I don't know, the more I looked into it, it was just Bitcoin. Like everything else doesn't matter. So it's just Bitcoin. And since then, I've thought about it 24/7. Constantly reading, constantly listening to podcasts, and it doesn't stop.
It's a fascinating subject. That's why, and it really draws on a multidiscipline in terms of different subjects. You can have conversations with people about, hopefully today, more technical side of things. You can talk to people about the philosophical implications of it. You can talk to people about, the social positive impact it's having through, banking the unbanked, I should say. And it's awesome. I'm absolutely loving going down this hole, and hence, one gets, what's the right way of saying it, motivated to start talking about it and, start a podcast or whatever. What really intrigues me about this particular part of the story you're talking about here is I'm not technical. Now, the most code I've ever written, I ever read was, when I recently powered through Andreas Antonopoulos's Mastering Bitcoin, but I'm not a technical person. I have always trusted friends or colleagues or other kind of thought leaders that were more technical than me to do that type of analysis, and then I'll jump on that bandwagon in a sense. Can we talk a little bit about that? So it's really important to me that I in a sense leverage someone else's skill set that I don't have to help improve my understanding of something and also my confidence in it. So, you're a software developer. Bitcoin is software. What was it about it that made you realize like this is actually something I need to research more? And how do you build that confidence over time? Like what is so good about it that gets you excited?
Yeah. Surprisingly, it wasn't really the technical side of it. My views on money and that, the stock market is a scam and everything like that. I knew in 2008, sort of, I didn't understand how there could be such sudden changes in the economy, how everything could just suddenly collapse and stop working. And I'd been asking these questions, and it wasn't really until I discovered Bitcoin and started reading about, what it was that made Bitcoin, that actually answered the questions. So I guess it was finding out these things about Bitcoin that make it unique, that's what drew me in. So more so than the technical side of it, it is literally the properties that Bitcoin has that makes it great.
That's so interesting. So just to kind of chime on that. So you had let's say you had a worldview that was a skeptical one, and you were looking at the world of finance, and you couldn't quite understand what was wrong. And it just didn't seem right that everything had crashed the way that it did in 2008. And I'm very similar in a sense. I went through business school. I got a undergraduate degree in business management. Not once do they teach us about what money is. They teach about how to make money, but not necessarily and actually not the best way of making money being fractional reserve banking / printing it yourself. But that's like conveniently not kept in there. But that's exciting in a sense. But so your ability to look at the technical side of things, understand that it worked, and actually the implications of that are far more important to you in a sense, is what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And so you're building VoltPay. This is obviously a relatively new project, I guess. I like to try and work in the startup space for a long time, and very passionate about entrepreneurship and the ability for it to do great things. And specifically, software is an incredible tool as entrepreneurs in that you can build compounding value with very little extra cost. And if it doesn't work, you just scrap it and start again with something else. Incredible tool to build value with, in a sense. What's the problem that you're solving at VoltPay?
So initially, I had been thinking for a long time, I want to build something, and I didn't really know what it was that I wanted to build. I think it was sometime last year when all of the vaccine mandates started coming in and everything along those lines. I really started seeing a massive divide in throughout the world, but particularly in Australia, that there was going to be the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And I thought that we needed a way that people could just continue transacting without being shut out from society. So essentially VoltPay using Lightning, Bitcoin that's what it gives you. Nobody can stop us from transacting, in theory.
Yeah,
that was my initial thought.
Okay.
Sorry, you go.
No. It's a noble cause and absolutely critical. For those that don't necessarily understand Bitcoin as well as you and I, how would you explain Bitcoin and then the Lightning Network, and how it actually has the ability to help people to transact? So perhaps you could just talk through like the problem case that, let's say, I face today in Australia. How does that look initially, and then how might you change that in the future?
So I guess keeping the vaccine mandates in mind and that sort of thing. The situation that I was seeing was that certain people wouldn't be allowed to go into shops, or potentially they could be cut off from bank accounts and various other services. So where Bitcoin comes into that, and Lightning as well, is that it can be completely peer-to-peer. You don't need to go through any third-party services. So you can continue transacting. And it's essentially nobody can stop you. I can send you a payment now and you will have it straight away. And nobody is in the middle of that.
And so does anything like this exist in Australia at this point in time?
Not as far as I'm aware. I mean, there is other payment providers that are offering Lightning and Bitcoin and that sort of thing. there is open source solutions as well. So BTC Pay Server, for example, and anyone could go and set that up themselves. The difficulty with that is you need a certain level of technical understanding to be able to go and set up a node and then set up the software and connect it all up.
And so VoltPay, you're intending to be more user-friendly in that sense for the average person, just to get on, basically. Well, so talk me through what it means. But so I've got my mobile phone here. How do I use VoltPay?
Yeah, so the simplest use case, if you've never seen Bitcoin before and you're running a shop, you want to sell something, all you need to do is download the app, set up an account, which is add in your email address and password, and from that point you can start accepting payments straight away. You can do more setup by adding in your products and setting up pricing and categories and all of that sort of stuff. But simply by downloading the app, and creating your account, you can start accepting payments. So that is the simplest use case. On top of that, you can go further down the rabbit hole and get more technical and set it up in more complex ways. But initially, I feel like to get people, non-Bitcoiners, on board using it, we need to make it really simple. So that's what I've aimed to do.
And I have to say, I recently watched the Jack Mallers' presentation at the Bitcoin conference, and talking about how Strike was disrupting payment networks. This is a very similar concept, what you're talking about, but essentially here in Australia. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, I guess Strike is targeted more consumers, although they are definitely moving into the merchant side with the partnerships that they've done. So that's really good. But yeah, it would work on the merchant side in a very similar way to Strike.
Well, and the reason I bring that up being the kind of the crux of Jack's presentation that was so clever, in my opinion, was very, very clear about how the status quo payment network system exists, why it was created, and effectively there hasn't been much innovation for 50 years. And so through using the Bitcoin Lightning Network, he's able to completely cut out 2-3% of current payment fees, which to my mind is a really obvious use case for lots and lots of merchants, right? So small stores on street corners, or the local farmers market, or wherever, they'll always they don't really want you to spend less than $10 or $20 because they're spending so much on fees. So I'm just trying to understand from a VoltPay perspective the business case that you're building out. So to my mind, if you can clearly say, well, look, we're going to try and chop this margin out, then brilliant. Okay, I can see that being a really nice business. Or equally, this problem with segregation of vaxxed and unvaxxed, it could could be by skin color, it could be by any kind of fascist agenda that appears. The point being is you allow the individual to potentially transact much more easily than if they use the status quo system that could be corruptible in some sense. So whether they're using PayPal, or whether they're using Venmo, or whether they're using Cash App, or any of these other companies that are centralized, they could potentially, like Westpac here or Commonwealth Bank, these guys could be coerced into saying, right, freeze this person's account because of their behavior, or whatever might be the case. And although we live in a Western liberal democracy, who would have thought that Melbourne would be shut up for 300 days in the last 24 months? I mean, it just is unheard of, even conceptually. So these threats are very real. And anyone that turns around to us and says, you guys are completely nuts for talking about this, well, look what just happened. Anything can happen. So could you talk a little bit more about where you feel VoltPay is going to really benefit people? So I'm particularly looking for how does it make it cheaper? How does it make it faster? Or how does it make it stronger in some way than the current status?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, as with everyone using the Lightning Network, settlement is instant. So the merchants don't need to wait 2 days to get their funds. Once they've made a sale, that's it. They've got their Bitcoin. That's one of the big ones. The fees is an obvious saving for them. So at the moment, VoltPay is completely free. We will be introducing tiered subscriptions. So based on volume, the pricing will go up. But it will be a flat subscription fee, sort of monthly fee, rather than percentage based. So with that, we're trying to obviously save a lot for the merchants. And I just lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I have a point just to help flesh that out a bit. This concept of instant settlement. If you're not familiar with the Bitcoin network or Bitcoin, the asset, whatever you want to describe it as, if I give Michael a piece of gold right now, that gold holds value because people have used it as money for thousands of years, and he can walk off with it and do what he wants. That is effectively instant settlement. I have transferred value at a very fundamental level from myself to Michael. This is what Bitcoin does. Whereas if I go to the supermarket and I use my Westpac MasterCard and I'm paying for things, the value transaction is actually just a ledger. Basically, people are moving digital versions of a bearer asset. So it's a really important distinction as to how important Bitcoin can be in the future. Like this idea that we can send microtransactions of value that are, instant settlement. So a very, very small fraction of a piece of gold bullion, is actually the cost of my coffee. I don't want to send a whole piece of gold bullion, so I can just chop it up into a tiny piece, send it digitally, and the coffee shop receives, that tiny piece of gold. And this was, to me, it's a huge part of, I hope I haven't butchered that description too badly, but a huge part of understanding the value proposition of what this actually is. It's digital instant settlement bearer asset. Like this has never existed before. And it's a fundamental step change in how we can build our society effectively. It's very cool, isn't it? Wow, it really gets you kind of pumped. How do you see this playing out? Like, what gets you really inspired, Michael, about this? And what do you think? What was the moment you go, "Fuck it, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to build something"?
I think we have a choice at the moment. Bitcoin succeeds or we're all screwed. So yeah, really, like there's no other option. We just have to make it win. So that's really what's been driving me. And yeah, it's kind of it just took me a bit of time to figure out where I needed to start. And yeah, so this is the start, and there's a long way ahead.
And so when did you start, Michael?
I started actually putting code down in December, I think. Yeah, wow, okay. about Christmas.
So what are we now? April. So yeah,
yeah.
Coming up to 6 months or so. And you're just working alone, or you're working with a team?
Yeah, I do have. So I'm still actually working on some real estate stuff as well.
Yep.
So that's paying the bills. And so I have a team as part of that. But on VoltPay, I've been actually doing everything myself so far.
Okay. Well, so one of the things that I'm kind of in the middle of writing an article about per se, but having spent 4 or 5 years working in the startup space, I did some angel investing, looking for clean tech companies in particular that were, potentially a part of the green economy of the future, and that's proved relatively successful. And I had a couple of startups of my own that all failed. I went through some talent investment programs. So they put 100 of you in a room together. 50% of the room are technical, and the other 50% are ex industry. So in my case, I was out of the shipping industry initially. I learned so much from that. But the concept of venture capital and the current kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem it's very, very, very high time preference. And the point is you've got 6 months, you've got 100K, you've got 2 people, your runway is, very short, essentially. You've got a sprint, and you've got to try as much as you can to get some traction in that 6 months to then prove to any potential early stage investor that you're making progress faster than all of the other opportunities they could possibly invest into, and therefore get their money. In some ways, like learning about Bitcoin was really fascinating, because how you finance ideas has potentially changed forever. So, for example, if I was to give you a Bitcoin today and I was to fund VoltPay with 1 Bitcoin, we can make a pretty good bet that over 4 years, that might 10x from today. You know, if history repeats itself, we can expect some upside. If we look at market comparisons, let's say the market cap of gold, 10 trillion, today Bitcoin roughly $1 trillion. Well, that's a 10x upside if it truly does displace gold. So I'm just intrigued, what or how do you see Bitcoin affecting entrepreneurship and ideas, and this ability to, you know, utilize a deflationary asset on a balance sheet of an idea, and therefore you're no longer stuck on that kind of rabbit wheel of hunting for venture capital funding, and you've got small teams that are absolutely knackered and completely everything's on the line, right? The equity has no value if you don't get more funding. Fact. You've got to get the traction. You've got to get the investor in, and it's, you know, it's a high stakes game. Yeah. How do you think this will change things?
It's a good question, and it's something that I have spent quite a lot of time thinking about. It does shift time preference, obviously, and I think it will make things more competitive, in that companies that aren't going to make it, that don't prove themselves, will no longer be propped up and no longer able to survive. So I think in that regard, things will get harder. But at the same time, if Bitcoin does what it's supposed to do, what we're all expecting it will do, there's going to be people with a lot more time, a lot more access to capital to achieve things that are not purely based on profit. So we can actually make, I feel like, take for example, iPhones. You know, every year they release a new version, and it's very incremental. There's all sorts of technology that could be in these phones now that they're just not releasing, and they do that so you buy a new one next year, and then the year after, and the year after that. On a Bitcoin standard, when it wins, when it's successful, things will shift so much that such a consumer mindset won't be quite so common, I guess. So we can spend more time focusing on building things better and just improving everything beyond like imagination. Yeah.
It's an incredible thought process to go through that, isn't it? When you think, well, hang on, what do I do with my time? I work, or I look after my family, or I do both those things in most people's cases. You know, we work from the age of 18 to 62, and then potentially we have an allowance from some kind of retirement fund that we've been forced to use, or whatever the case might be. And that's your life. You know, that's what's ahead, and that's largely because we can't make enough money to survive, and so therefore, or the money that we do make disintegrates in value, and therefore, unless you're, you know, really good at investing it or saving it in some other way, then, you know, you just have to keep exchanging your time for money. And in an environment where you can actually exchange your time for money that goes up in value rather than goes down in value, it changes everything. And I think there's very few people in the world that will say that the work that they do to, you know, make money is their passion. Like, they just do it to make money, right? You got to pay the bills, you got to pay the rent, you got to, you know, buy food, whatever the case might be. So it's extraordinary to think, wow, you know, all of those interests that you've had in your lifetime that you never followed up on because, oh, you can't make money out of that. well, where would that take someone had they gone down that route? And we kind of touched on this earlier about, you get this thing where you look back and think, could I have done that differently? Well, potentially Bitcoin opens up a huge amount of creative ability for people to sit down and start thinking about what they're really passionate about. They don't need to be paid for it. They just do it because they love it. And the innovation that might well be unlocked it's completely mind-blowing what might happen. We have probably got no concept for what it actually means.
When you're not focusing on surviving, everything will thrive, I guess. That's what it is. Yeah.
And so on this point, have you noticed any changes in your day-to-day life? I mean, you're throwing yourself into building a Bitcoin focused business. I guess Bitcoin only, I didn't want to use that because you just never know what might happen in the future. But has your day-to-day life been altered in any way because of getting involved in Bitcoin?
I'm probably atypical, to use that word, compared to most other people, in that I've always been fairly low time preference, and a lot of the trends that Bitcoiners tend to focus on, what they eat and doing exercise and that sort of stuff. It's just always been something that I've focused on. We have a small market garden that we sell chemical-free produce just in my spare time, and that sort of thing. And I've always been aware of those sorts of things. But I guess what it has changed for me is I'm naturally fairly nihilistic, and I think that's changed, especially recently. The last 3 years have been a bit of a struggle for me, and I had a lot of things going on top of all of the COVID stuff, and really listening to podcasts, and there's a lot of super intelligent people, and then there's other people in the space that they're not afraid to tell you to just snap out of it, and I think that's what has changed for me. So it's really allowed me to focus on something to improve like my own situation and also improve the world at the same time.
And Michael, listen, I don't want to pry too much into your private life. Don't share as much or as little as you want.
Yep.
The challenges that you've faced over the last 2 to 3 years, how have you begun to? I mean, have you overcome them? And what I'm excited by in some ways is, well, not in some ways, I am extremely excited by the ability of people to take heat, to come under stress and be like, fuck, what is going on? How do I get out of this problem? And then how they react is truly, like, it's emotional, but it's also exciting. You're like, whoa, that's cool. Could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you don't have to reveal too much, as I said.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really secret or anything, but I guess I got to a pretty dark point, and yeah, things weren't looking good. And I there was a podcast. I can't remember exactly what it was. Somebody was talking about depression, and the point was made that basically it's a choice, and I took that pretty personally. So from there, I made a decision that yeah, it is actually a choice. I can sit here and wallow in all the terrible things that are happening, or I can do something about it. So not everything is perfect now, and whose life is perfect, but I've found a way that I can deal with the things that I was dealing with, and also focus on things to move forward and improve situations. So without being in this scene and listening to all the people that I've listened to and reading all the stuff that I've read, I probably wouldn't have had that, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to, you know, make the decision. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's quite extraordinary to me, the ability for this innovative technology, nascent thing, to positively impact people. It gives them something to talk about, something to dream about, something to build on top of. And here's just yet another example of that, like perfectly illustrated. And you know, it is true. You do get choices, and some it's the strangest thing, isn't it? And suddenly you're listening to something like, that's relevant to me. You then go,
yeah,
whoa, what am I going to do? And as I mentioned before you spoke, this is what's exciting to me, is how people react to adverse situations and what they then do from that. Could you tell me a little bit about what it was that Bitcoin represented to you that was something that you were so sure of? So I imagine there's been a battle going on in your head about, you know, hate the world, or, you know, make yourself feel better, or whatever it might have been. What were the characteristics of Bitcoin and the community of people and the the research that you did that drew you towards it and said, okay, I can actually pick myself up and attach myself to this in some way and build something that's really important to me?
As funny as it sounds, it's probably the toxicity that we all get so much criticism about. Bitcoiners will say it how it is, and you know, there's no sugarcoating it, and sometimes that's just what people need to hear.
And so yeah, if you could break that down a little bit more. So what is the culture of toxicity within Bitcoin?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah, don't worry, it's all on you. No, I'm joking. No, I mean, because I'll lead if you want a little bit. Like, to me, it's, you know, it's anonymous accounts hassling people on Twitter about, you know, people promoting altcoins that are quite clearly, you know, they've been, let's say there's 1 million coins, the first 500,000 went to the early founders and the VC company, and they've then just dropped another 500,000 of them on a bunch of unsuspecting retail investors and told them to sell it to their friends and family, which they do. The price pumps, and then the early adopters that got them for free just drop them. You know, it's unethical. It's very simple. There's a reason the securities law, and it just hasn't caught up with the crypto industry yet. It will at some stage. And I think Bitcoiners are completely and utterly rational in that sense. They're like, Bitcoin only for a specific reason, and they can always illustrate that. Yeah, maybe you could just carry on from that. Did that spark any thoughts your side? I mean, what is it to you that makes toxicity about Bitcoin?
I guess there's a culture like of a group of people that have realized what this is that we're dealing with, this software that, you know, has spawned such a large industry and community. They've realized what it is. They've done the research. They've spent the time, and they know what's at stake, and therefore they're willing to protect it. And I guess that comes out. They're not always right, but they will do what they need to do to make a point, and, you know, call out things when they need to be called out. So it's just a culture of not accepting when things don't seem right, and putting forward what needs to be said.
One way I kind of distill it is, and I think this is a characteristic that seemingly most Bitcoiners I speak to have, which is the ability to, first of all, think for themselves from like a first principles perspective. So, well, hang on, what's going on here? And think about why, and dig a little deeper, and not just accept what you're told. That as a starting point is a characteristic I see in basically everyone, where they're going, hang on, this doesn't make sense. And then it comes to a point of like, okay, well,
I think it's something that something that comes with doing the research as well, spending the time. And the more you have spent that time, the more you question things.
Yeah, precisely. And so it's that ability to sit down and go, okay, well, this doesn't quite make sense. Let's try and find out why. And the further you dig, the more that, I mean, this is my experience, the more you start to go, well, hang on, basically nothing makes sense in terms of, why was I taught what I was taught at school? What was the syllabus? Why was I told that? Just this consistent conditioning that's happened purposefully, nefariously. It really doesn't matter in so many ways. It kind of has. And perhaps the more toxic you become, the more nefarious you think the whole thing is. But it's an ability for a community of people to have got together and have all shared a similar question, which is, well, what's going on? And the answer to that is, very, very long rabbit hole. But the bond that is created between the people that have bothered to do that is very, very strong. Yeah, I mean, I've already made some mates that I'm sure I'll know for the rest of my life through jumping down this hole, which is very exciting. And you need friendships, you need relationships to help you get through through the world. Like, things happen, you don't expect them to, and who knows. Yeah, it's very cool, isn't it? I'm not quite sure where to take the conversation from here. Is there anything that's sprung to mind that you'd like to talk about, Michael, whilst we're here?
Oh, put me on the spot.
That's all right. I mean, you can ask me a question, or I'm thinking back about what we've covered, and so this is what I was going to ask you about. So the kind of the 24/7 rabbit hole that is Bitcoin. Like, why do you find that that's the case? Like, what is it that's so appealing to you? How do you spend all your time researching the same subject?
Well, that's probably a pretty simple answer: autism.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I don't know. There's just an endless supply of content to consume and information to absorb. It never runs out. Every day there's something more. There's a lot of stuff happening in the finance world now, and that's probably something else that Bitcoin has sucked me into, actually paying interest in the broader finance world, which, thinking it was all a scam, I never really did before. So yeah, it's really there's just always something to find out about and something to learn. So
and so whilst we're there, so in terms of the broader finance world, so what are some of the impacts that you see happening?
The biggest thing, obviously, lately is all the money printing and everything along those lines. There's big changes that are happening as a direct result of everything leading up to where we are now.
I was struck as well at the start of this conversation, the 2008 reference you make, and actually when you realize the Genesis block of Bitcoin has a reference to Chancellor bailing out banks again. This is obviously in front of mind of the designer, like he, she, they, whoever they are. The ability for a centralized party to print money, it's quite extraordinary that it's even possible, right? Like, when you start to actually look at it, and things are going to change, aren't they? I mean, they have to.
They do have to. It's amazing that it has managed to go on as long as it has, in my mind. And yeah, like I said, there's no choice. We have to make Bitcoin succeed, or yeah, who knows what will happen, but it won't be pretty.
Okay, and so Michael, what I'll do to start wrapping up, you touch on there, like, if we don't succeed, we're buggered, basically. Could you talk a little bit about what success looks like for Bitcoin in the future?
I think essentially it needs to be used. There's a big trend. It's probably slowly dying out, but there's a big trend of just buy and hold and don't touch it because the price is going to go up. I think it needs to be used, or there's eventually not going to be any value in it. So success is when a lot more of the population, a lot more of the population has it and uses it. They're using it to transact on a daily basis. From there, things start to change dramatically. Who knows what that is going to look like? But yeah, I think the biggest case of success is that just people are using it. A lot of people.
And I guess that's where some of the inspiration for VoltPay has come from, is making Bitcoin more usable. And I'm sure that entrepreneurs out there like yourself are thinking the same thing. Like, if we can't get people using this every day in some way, then of course it's going to shrivel and die because there's no user. You talk about progress, etc., from a kind of VC perspective. If there's no traction, then there's nothing. And so user rates are crucial to get up. I totally agree on that front, and it's very exciting to think about what's being built on top of Bitcoin and what Lightning enables, and this concept of microtransactions. And I'm just currently looking at the value for value podcasting space and having a little profile on Fountain, and I've already received my first sats for some of my podcasts, which is very cool. Going back to what we touched on earlier, I've basically had small bits of digital gold sent directly to my own wallet on my app on my phone for creating content. How unbelievably cool, with no middleman whatsoever. And to flip the question around, Michael, so what does success not look like? I.e., if this fails, where are we going?
I try not to think about it too much.
And that's a great answer just in itself. I mean, I agree.
Yeah. I think the way the world is going now, without success, things will get tough. Just looking at the, all the prices going up of everything, food shortages, energy shortages, that sort of thing. And that's all happened really quickly. If we keep going down that path, who knows how bad things could get.
Where you touched on earlier about this, the unvaxxed and the vaxxed, and this kind of arbitrary rule that was set in place in society that created segregation in a way that hadn't been seen, for a very long time. Under the guise of health, obviously, it's for your own health that this has been done, which is interesting. The march towards central bank digital coins may be overblown, maybe not, but you have to look at what happened in Canada with the freedom truckers and people using their, supposedly liberal and freedom of speech backed ability to protest their own government in the middle of winter, were on a street in a protest saying, we disagree with what you're doing. And they froze their bank accounts. Like, what? Like, talk about an overreaction, right? And talk about the inability for an organization to take any criticism. And this was, there's all sorts of stories of normal people that got found sending money to certain accounts and then they had their own accounts frozen. So anyone that tells you that governments aren't going to wield digital power in ways that haven't been done before is frankly living under a rock and completely and utterly naive to the threat that's out there. And so you're right, like the future could look pretty scary. Now, in this case, the arbitrary rule that was put in place was, the Freedom Trucker Rally, or was whether or not you decided to get a medical experiment, which it's under experimentation, the vaccines here in Australia. If you did, great. If you didn't, great. Like, whatever. But the arbitrary line that said power is going to draw can change, right? Have you had kids or not? All right, you've got children. You're not allowed to, use a certain amount of carbon, or who knows what it might be. And so I'm absolutely, as you can imagine, doing a podcast about Bitcoin, very bullish of the type of characters that have been drawn to this, the people that want to build on it, and the future potential is much, much better than a world in which someone has the ability to, switch your lights on and off, to take your money off you, for rules that they make, right? It's like, well, hang on, I didn't make that rule. Why have I got to agree to that? So yeah, it could get pretty dark, couldn't it?
Yes, it could. Yeah, we just have to keep working and do everything we can to make it succeed.
And we will. So Michael, so just to wrap things up, any final comments at all? And equally, if people want to get hold of you, where can they do that?
Twitter is probably the best place.
Okay.
Probably the VoltPay app would be the easiest one. So that's it. VoltPay app.
Cool. I'll post a link to your Twitter account in the show notes. It's been really awesome getting to know you a bit better, having not spoken before, and to learn about your story. I'm always incredibly grateful of people's time, and equally the amount of time that people have spent themselves researching Bitcoin. You're throwing yourself into a new project to build a product that ultimately makes Bitcoin better in the future. It's epic. Thank you so much. And any Bitcoiner in the future is going to be proud of people like yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Cheers.